Good evening. Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying says it's right for the government to step in to curb parallel trading of baby milk powder. Leung admitted today his administration's new rules may be radical, but insisted they're needed to protect the interests of local people. Edna Tse reports.
This is Shengshu Station a day after the government announced the string of measures to tackle the problem of parallel traders scooping up all the city's baby milk powder before locals can. Usually there's a long line of them queuing to get into the station, but there weren't many there today. The parallel traders have been blamed for the scarce supply of milk powder and other essential items across the territory. But in Mongkok, some mainland travellers were spotted looking for baby milk powder. This traveller said she wants to take some home before the new law comes into effect and limits travellers to carrying only 2 cans. But she said the new law won't stop her, as it will only mean she'll have to make more cross-border trips. To ensure there's enough milk powder for local mothers and to combat parallel trading, the government announced a string of measures, including a weight limit of 23 kilos per passenger on trains. Extra scales will be put up at stations from Monday. The government has also asked for permission from the Executive Council to limit travellers to taking only 1.8 kilos of milk powder, or 2 cans, out of the territory, a measure that could be introduced as early as this month. Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying has defended the government's drastic measures. He said although they are radical, the government must give priority to local people and ensure that Hong Kong mothers can get their hands on milk powder to feed their babies. He said that he stated clearly in his policy address that the government will put Hong Kong people first in terms of the housing supply and other areas that are prone to shortages. Leung said the government will also scrutinize supplies of other commodities which might affect the daily lives of Hong Kongers and has not ruled out rolling out more measures in future to protect their interests. Another measure that kicked off yesterday at 6 p.m. was a 24-hour government hotline set up for local parents to place orders for 7 major milk formula brands. Health Chief Koh Man said the hotline has received over 2,000 calls already, and he believes some parents may be able to get the cans by next Thursday.
Government is closely monitoring the situation from the utilization of the government's 24-hour hotline to the next stage. We will be looking at the logistical situation of the actual delivery of the formula milk very closely, I think in the next 2 or 3 days.
Most of the orders have been transferred to the supplier, and Koh dismissed accusations that the government is trying to shift its responsibilities.
There are different opinions about the extent to which government should intervene. And even the current level of intervention, I received different feedbacks, including that we are doing perhaps too much. So I believe this is a very targeted approach and hopefully hitting at the crux of the problem, which is the failure of the interface between the customers and the suppliers.
Police Commissioner Andy Zhang says the force will cooperate with various government departments to combat the problem of cross-border trading in milk powder.
If immigration departments required, we will assist them with dealing with cases of employing persons not lawfully employable, and also deal with visitors who breach the condition of stay. And for our colleagues in customs excise, we would assist them with dealing with smuggling offences.
The government will also enhance cooperation and law enforcement operations with Shenzhen authorities to tackle the problem.
Hong Kong's top policeman has denied that the force banned fundraising booths from being set up along the route of the anti-government rally on New Year's Day. Thousands of people took to the streets for an anti-government rally on New Year's Day. At the same time the organisers wanted to have their voices heard, they also wanted to raise money and hand out pamphlets explaining their grievances. So it was not surprising a ban on booths along the protest route angered them and prompted them to accuse the government of trying to suppress dissent. On the day, the group set up stalls anyway and seemed to have got away with it, as the police didn't bother any of them. But responding to questions about the booths today, Police Commissioner Andy Zhang said he was puzzled by the whole episode.
Now, first, the police never said that we do not allow any of this so-called street stall at all. What we are banning was street stall along the possession path. What that meant is, if the street stall were not exactly on the possession path, then the police would have no objection.
The Independent Police Complaints Council, which sent members to monitor the rally, suggested earlier that instead of imposing a blanket ban on booths, the police should just talk to the organisers beforehand and come to an agreement. But the police chief insists the decision was based on past experiences.
The IPOCC actually sent members to observe the procession on the 1st of July last year, and they have seen for themselves how some of these street stalls caused major obstruction, even to the extent that the entire procession route was blocked, requiring the opening of alternative route to enable the procession to carry on. And on that occasion, you would remember that we had a lot of complaints about people weren't able to get out of Victoria Park, and people weren't able to move forward.
Zhang even hit back at the organisers, saying they never bothered to complain to them directly about the conditions, even though there was plenty of time for them to do so.
The police issued the letter of no objection well before Christmas, on the 22nd of December. The organisers of these activities, if they do not agree with this condition, they are entitled to appeal to the tribunal.
He added that similar booths may be allowed in the future at appropriate locations. Social Welfare Director Patrick Nip says the government will be lenient towards elderly people who accidentally make mistakes when taking the means test for the increased fruit money, but it won't be lenient against those who do it deliberately. Emily Sue reports.
The government is doubling its monthly handout to elderly people, known as fruit money, to $2,200. But to get the money, they'll have to pass the controversial means test to prove they really need it, which means declaring all their assets. Social Welfare Director Patrick Nip says money elderly people get from their children will not be counted, but any leftover amount will be included as their assets. But that's causing confusion. On a radio program this morning, Nip said if elderly applicants are found to have accidentally made false declarations, the government won't hold it against them. But if information about assets is deliberately hidden, they will be in trouble because it's against the law. Nip didn't explain how the government would be able to determine whether mistakes were accidental or deliberate. Some senior citizens called in to tell Nip they're still confused about the whole means test. Many of them don't know whether valuables like gold jewelry, earned niches, or MPF contributions are considered assets. Nip answered that jewelry and niches don't count, but if their MPF money has been transferred to their personal bank account, then it's included in the asset tally. He insisted the government has tried to make the procedure as simple as possible. Based on figures announced on Thursday, up to 460,000 senior citizens are expected to benefit from the new allowance. Of those, 290,000 who have already passed the means test will start getting paid as early as the 5th of April. Nip said over 70% of them have income and assets less than half of the current limit. But these recipients will go through a means test again next April. Emily Sue, ATV News.
3 people who were trying to smuggle $1.4 million worth of drugs to Australia have been arrested at the airport. But first, in our roundup of local news, drinkers might have to fork out more in the future if a levy on glass bottles is introduced. With tons of glass bottles dumped into landfills every year, the government has been accused of not doing enough to reduce waste. But a solution could be just around the corner, as authorities are considering a levy on glass drink bottles in a bid to encourage recycling. So how much will the proposed levy set drinkers back? Environment Secretary Wong Kam Sing said today it will depend on the recycling costs, which at present are about $1 for a red wine bottle. While the levy will include bottles of beer, wine and spirits, soft drinks and sauces will not have a surcharge. Wong said details of the scheme will be finalised after a 3-month consultation starting next week. 3 people on suspicion of drug trafficking were arrested at the airport last night. Following a tip-off, officers from the narcotics squad stopped 2 women and a man, aged 19 to 22, who were checking in for a flight to Australia. About 2 kilograms of the drug ice, worth $1.4 million on the street, were seized. Financial Services Secretary Chan Ka-Kung has defended the government's proposal to amend the company's ordinance in a bid to improve the privacy of corporate directors. While Chan acknowledged the media's concerns about press freedom, he said the plan is necessary to protect personal privacy. But he remains open to ideas and hopes to strike the right balance. If passed, the amendment would bar the public, or journalists in particular, from accessing the details. Transport and Housing Secretary Anthony Cheung says the government is studying the subdivided flat problem and will report its findings by May. Cheung also said the current well-off tenants policy for public housing will not be relaxed. Emily Sue reports.
After Leung Chun-ying made his policy address, lawmakers have been complaining about the lack of short-term measures to help people in subdivided flats. Living conditions in many of them are poor and in some cases dangerous. But people who live in them usually can't afford anything else due to rising property prices driving up rents, so it's often a last resort. The Long-Term Housing Strategy Steering Committee had its 3rd meeting this morning, and afterwards, Housing Secretary Anthony Cheung said the government is studying how many people live in subdivided units and what the conditions are like. He said a report will be ready in May. Cheung also commented on the government's well-off tenants policy in rented public housing. Right now, when a household's total assets exceed the income limit by 84 times, they get kicked out. This has forced many young people to leave their parents' homes and join the public housing queue, along with the other 210,000 people on the waiting list. Some have hoped the rules could be relaxed a little, but Cheung said the current policy is working just fine and has been for years, so it won't be changing. He added that reviews of the financial status of tenants every 10 years is appropriate because most of them passed a means test when they first applied. Cheung also said lawmakers disagreed about reintroducing the Home Assistance Loan Scheme, as it will only push property prices even higher. When asked if the government will set up a minimum income requirement for subsidized housing applicants, Cheung said the issue needs to be studied more. He stressed that the administration will work on improving the current distribution system of public housing, so the neediest, such as elderly or older single people, will be attended to first. Emily Sue, TV News.
Japan's Coast Guard has detained a Chinese fishing boat near the southern Japanese island of Okinawa and arrested the captain for illegally collecting coral. The vessel was stopped 150 kilometres from the Diaoyu Islands in the East China Sea, which are at the centre of a territorial dispute between the 2 countries. The boat was carrying 13 mainland fishermen, but the 63-year-old captain was the only one arrested. Hillary Clinton has left office as US Secretary of State after 4 years in the post. In her farewell speech to staff, Clinton insisted the world is a safer place. Anne-Marie Sim reports.
To the sound of rapturous applause and cheers, Hillary Clinton said an emotional goodbye to staff at the State Department before standing down as the